Greetings, Facebook world. I have a confession to make. I hate meditation. I hate meditating. I don't like sitting down and trying to be still and quiet my mind and try to make no thoughts appear in my head. Why do I not like that? Well, because it's impossible for me to shut down my mind. And I know that a lot of people who have anxiety feel the same way, or have felt the same way about meditation. In my experience, whenever I've sat down to meditate, I would sit down. The goal becomes to shut off my thoughts, to quiet my mind. I would sit and I'd close my eyes and I'd breathe in deep and I'd breathe and I'd do all these things. I'd try to relax. Then I'd think about how my foot itches and I'd want to scratch the itch on my foot. And then that would end. So then I would think about, then something would enter my mind like, oh, you know what, I got to do this thing today, make this call that I didn't really want to make. And then my mind would attach to that and it would go down this hole, and then I'd catch it and I'd say, dang it, no. And it would be a constant stream of those kinds of thoughts. Who else has ever experienced that when they're meditating? Chances are, if you have an overactive mind like I do, it happens all the time, and it's just part of the way we live. You know, we tend to think about and anchor to these thoughts, and it sends us down these rabbit holes, and we associate our feelings with those thoughts. Those thoughts invoke the feelings of anger or frustration, and the more we think when we're meditating, especially when we present ourselves with the goal of trying to quiet or shut down our mind, the more we think to ourselves that we're failing at this task of meditating. But it took me to learn, you know, through the process of just trying to learn how to actually meditate the right way, you know, just with a little bit of research, that, you know, I was doing it all wrong. That meditation is not necessarily just about quieting the mind. And when I learned these couple of secrets that and they're not secrets, I don't want to make it that word, but when I learned these techniques or learned these goals about how to meditate properly, it changed my perspective on it and actually started to make it enjoyable because the goals changed. I realized that within meditation, and one of the things that I failed to do when I meditated previously was to really just recognize that it's not a perfect practice. It's just a practice in trying to get in touch with our mind and you know, organize the files, so to speak. So, you know, the technique or the goal is not necessarily is not to shut down the mind. It's impossible. Think about how whenever you've sat down and you've quieted your mind and you've thought to yourself, all right, I'm just going to shut down my mind and not think about anything. Does that ever work? No, because then you're going to start thinking about not thinking, and then your thinking leads to, well, what is it like to have a quiet or empty brain, or what is it like to have these things? You have to focus on something. Your mind has to focus on something, and the great thing about when you're meditating, or when you do it, when you meditate in this different way, is that it begins to give you a new perspective on your thoughts. Rather than thinking of your thoughts as something that invoke an emotion or amplify this emotion, it actually presents these thoughts in such a way that you can be a little more stoic about them. You can just experience them as what they are, is that they're not that your thoughts aren't out to harm you, that they are just thoughts. They're floating through space, and you can acknowledge them, accept them, and move on. It becomes a superpower in that way, because that's what the real practice is. It's to really is to quiet your mind by acknowledging your thoughts, by observing them. So the goal instead, and this is something that was a revelation to me when I read Michael Singer's book, The Surrender Experiment. And if you haven't read it, then I suggest you do. He's got a couple of great books, The Surrender Experiment, and The Untethered Soul, and both of them kind of go deeply into how the meditation is. But the thing that stuck out to me when I read those books and when I learned a little bit more about meditation was not that it was necessarily to just try to actively force your mind to shut down. It was more the idea of just watching your thoughts, of taking yourself out, of just maybe putting your consciousness behind your body and observing the thoughts that come up. So you actively just sit there and you look into yourself to look at the thoughts, to observe the thoughts as they come up. And when those thoughts come up, when the thought arises that that you have to make that call today, and that it's making you nervous because you have to have this difficult conversation or whatever it is, instead of anchoring yourself to that and associating emotion with it and letting the emotion take over, you can simply observe the thought as it floats by. And you observe it, you look at it without judgment. You say to yourself that is a thought, that is causing me this feeling. It is making me, it gives me a sense of anxiety. And then you touch it, and then you let it go. And by letting it go, you, instead of forcing it into submission and then getting frustrated because you thought during this time when you were supposed to be quiet, you can instead just let it go and accept it. Accept that thought entered your mind, and then observe it, touch it, and let it go. And then you wait for the next one, and the next one will likely come as you do this. And that was a helpful way for me to remember it. But even that act of just kind of sitting in that space gets difficult sometimes, because it does invoke these emotions. So there's another technique, of course, for those of us with an active mind, that when I picked up, this was a real game changer. And I can't stress this enough. I know I talk about it a lot, but it was just the act of breathing in such a way that you can focus your attention, instead of on what your thoughts are, onto your breath, and onto your breath as it fills your lungs and your body fills with oxygen. If you can focus on that, when you take your breath in and your lungs expand and your lungs fill with this oxygen, and that oxygen gets into your capillaries, and then it gets into your blood, and it goes throughout your bloodstream, and it goes throughout your body. Your brain is focused on something new, and so you can focus on those breathing techniques, and that shifts your mind a little bit away from what your random thoughts will be, and shifts it onto something that you can be attentive to, that you can focus on, that's more empowering. And a good method for that, a good method which actually gives you energy and is good for your immune system and things like that, is the Wim Hof method, WIMHOF. And if you haven't heard of it, just Google Wim Hof, and you'll learn a great new breathing method. So that's kind of the revelation I've had with meditation, that instead of trying to force myself to stop thinking, instead of trying to getting frustrated because I can't stop my thoughts from coming up, I instead just acknowledge that thoughts are going to arise, and when they do, I have to acknowledge them without judgment, point them out, acknowledge the feelings that they arouse, and then touch them and just let them go and allow the next one to rise. And in that process, breathe deep and focus on the breath. Focus on how the breath fills your lungs with life-giving oxygen, and that oxygen flows through our bodies to cleanse us. So those are just a couple of ideas on how my perspective changed on meditation. And it no longer became a chore necessarily. It became something that I looked forward to in that instance, because I could sit down and really get to know myself, really get to know what my thoughts were, how my thoughts were occurring, instead of simply just reacting to them with intense emotion that surrounded them. And you see the difference throughout the day. It may not be apparent right away, but over time, if you do this with discipline, if you practice this type of meditation with discipline, you'll see that throughout your day, your thoughts aren't affecting you with an emotional intensity as much as they were. You go through your day and you acknowledge things a little more effectively, and you have a little bit more serenity in your life. It gives you that additional boost to just face the challenges that are unpredictable. So I hope you give that a try, and I just wanted to kind of share a little bit of my perspective on how to get over that hump of hating meditation, You don't have to hate it. It can actually be enjoyable, and it can be actually quite active. Through the breathing process, through observing, rather than trying to force those thoughts away. So I hope you enjoy your day, and we'll talk to you soon.